What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
1-800-585-9396.
What's stopping?
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
1-800-585-9396.
What's stopping?
To confess my sins to a priest.
What's stopping you? This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hi there, welcome again to Call to Communion, the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters. You know what? We are here for you. We are here to answer your questions about the Catholic faith, the things that you've been maybe pondering for years or even decades. Some of those things may be misunderstandings about faith and what the Catholic faith actually teaches. What a concept. Let's go to the source. Why not find out exactly what it teaches rather than relying on a memory from childhood or something that a coworker said, which may or may not be accurate. Let's go to the truth. Let's find out where the church actually stands on this, and this. This program is for you. Give us a call, 1-800-585-9396, 1-800-585-9396. If you're calling from out in Canada, your number is 1-205-271-2985. Want to say howdy to all of you who are checking us out on YouTube today. We know that we've got viewers and listeners all over the world. That is very cool. You can also send us a comment or a question right there on YouTube. Also, if you have an email question that you'd like to send to us, our address is ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. Rich Jesse is our producer, Matt Gubinski our phone screener. I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
Well, I'm doing well. Since I just went to a Chinese buffet with my wife, I'm ready for a nap. So,
yeah, exactly.
You know how that works.
I sure do.
I actually brought David a fortune cookie. So
Thank you.
You can enjoy that after the show.
Appreciate that.
There you go. You know, today we're going to actually kick off with a caller rather than an email, since we've got Stephen in Odessa ready to go here. Stephen, what is your question today?
Good morning or afternoon. My question is, what would you say to a Catholic who tells you that their spouse has found a non-Christian church that they want to take their children to? And the reason I ask that question is because I belong to a church that Catholicism doesn't consider Christian. I've gotten to where I don't consider it Christian. And I want to take my children to a Catholic church. I've grown to love the Catholic Church, but I don't know the argument to make except we're right and you're wrong. There's tactful ways of saying it, but it's just hard. Does that make sense?
Sure.
It does.
Sure.
And just to clarify, because Matt, our screener, said that you are a Mormon, that is correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good.
Okay, well, I appreciate the question, Stephen. And I don't think that the Catholic Church is right and the Mormon Church is wrong. Is it all a bad thing to say? Because that's factually true. Mormonism has a number of very serious difficulties with it, historical, biblical, philosophical, and otherwise, that make it just very, very difficult to have a rationally fulfilled Mormon faith, because the whole thing is based ultimately on a subjective experience, the so-called burning of the bosom, together with an awful lot of pressure from family, friends, community, and so forth, and being ostracized. And so there's a lot of psychological manipulation that comes into play, and rather than argument. And so I think that you do have to kind of move the conversation out of the realm of emotion and manipulation and guilt and family pressure, and you have to move it onto the solid ground of reason and scripture and historical evidence, because that's what's drawing you towards Catholicism. It's the truth claims of the church that are accessible to reason, through reflection and historical research and so forth. So that's not a bad way to go. Now, that being said, it's one thing when you're having a dispassionate apologetics conversation with a friend or neighbor. It's another thing when you're having the conversation with spouses. Typically are somewhat inoculated against the reasonable arguments of their significant other. It doesn't always work that way. So what I tell most people when they run up against this difficulty with a family member, spouse, or whatever, is make an appeal to conscience. I mean, Mormons are big on that. They're big on the burning in the bosom, of course. Make an appeal to your own conscience and to the sincerity of your conscience, and ask your to hear you out fairly, recognizing that this is for you a matter of conscience, that you can't be a rationally, morally fulfilled Mormon because you know the faith isn't true, not because of subjective criteria like the burning in the bosom, but because of rational criteria, objective criteria from history and archaeology and scripture and philosophy and all the other reasons that we can know that Mormonism is false. And that you've gotten to the point where you can't go and be an honest Mormon, that if you sit in the Mormon church, then you're bearing witness against yourself. You cannot be a good leader to your family, a good leader to your children. You can't provide a good moral example because you're living at odds. You're living really a divided self, and that's not a good moral example. Now, obviously, you don't have to lay this whole thing out at one time in a real, pressure cooker kind of way. That's the opposite of what you're trying to do. But could it gradually say, look, out of respect for me, out of respect for the integrity of my conscience, understand this is for me a matter of conscience, and it doesn't have to get done in one day. It can happen over the course of months. Many people I know that have left one religious community or another for the Catholic faith. It is a slow
journey.
process. It's a journey, and sometimes their spouse comes along right away when you explain the reasons. In all sincerity and truth and love, that makes perfect sense, and they jump in with both feet. Other times there may be more pushback, and it takes a while, and that it may take a long while. But many times the family will follow along because you're leading them in the direction of light and truth and love and mercy.
David, your wife came along after you. How much time was there?
Good little while, a couple of years.
Really?
A couple of years, yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
All right. Things to learn there. Stephen, is that helpful for you?
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. We'll be praying for you and your family there, as we do for all of our listeners. That brings us up to 8 minutes after the hour, almost 9 minutes after the hour, and we've got a couple lines open for you, and that is 1-800-585-9396. What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? We'd love to know about that. 1-800-585-9396. And if you have any kind of a question at all about the Catholic faith, this is your program. Call to Communion here on EWTN.
Sharing the fullness of the Catholic faith. 1-800-585-9396. This is Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
We were excited about getting married and starting a family right away, but I was still on the pill to regulate my cycles. Our priest asked us to take in classes. When I stopped the pill, NFP revealed that the pill was actually masking an ovarian cyst. After surgery, I'm now married and pregnant for guiding us to NFP.
To join Human Life International in this discussion, visit truthandcharityforum.org.
Think of all the media our young people are exposed to today. MTV, movies, what passes for entertainment on TV, song lyrics that are questionable or worse. Where do they hear the message that it's okay to be chaste and modest, or that it's not crazy to practice their faith, or to believe in a God who loves them and can forgive them no matter what they do? Catholic Radio is the answer. Be sure to tell your friends and relatives about the positive programming that you hear here on Catholic Radio.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? This is Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders. 1-800-585-9396.
Hey, welcome back. 10 minutes after the hour, almost 11 after. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN. We've got lines open for you at 1-800-585-9396. 1-800-585-9396. Before we go to John in Birmingham, I want to give you a little praise report here, David. This is from Mary Lou in Moses Lake, Washington. She says, I was listening yesterday to our show. You were a man from Mississippi. I was so impressed with that conversation and your respect for his dignity. You were firm in your facts, but very gentle in responding to his questions and his version of the Catholic facts. Then you invited him to see you in person, saying that you Alabama, inviting you there so that you could have a dialogue. The whole conversation was a wonderful example of looking for the things that can be agreed on and offering to discuss further the questions. I have heard you say, look for the things that are believed in by both parties, discuss in love. Thank you so much for the work that you do.
Well, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Very, very sincere there. And I was thinking about Mary Lou's response here. when I was listening with you talking with the Mormon gentleman, because there are similarities there. Mormons, my understanding, are very pro-life.
They are pro-life.
And that is common ground that we can build upon.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's, you got to start somewhere. That's the way we look at it. 12 after the hour, let us now go to John in Birmingham, right here, listening to Queen of Peace, AM 1480, Queen of Heaven radio, actually. Hey there, John, what's your question today?
Yes, thank you for taking my call. I have a question. I'm Catholic, but trying to sway someone who's not Catholic, and I think a good book on historical evidence of the Catholic Church might go a long way in swaying this person. I didn't know if Dr. Anders had a recommendation.
Okay, sure. So a couple of thoughts. Monsignor Philip Hughes was a Catholic historian from a generation ago who wrote a number of books. He wrote a popular history of the Catholic Church that might be a nice place to go. Of course, the Christendom series by Warren Carroll is a multi-volume treatment of in the history of the Church from a very devout and Orthodox perspective. In terms of look at history, I'd have to think for a little bit about one that went through history, sort of doctrine by doctrine study. But it doesn't necessarily have to be by a Catholic author. I think Jan D. Kelly's book, Early Christian Doctrine, particularly if you're dealing with a kind of low church or evangelical Protestant, Kelly was an Anglican actually, but reading his history of early Christian theology had a big impact on me when I realized how little of evangelical theology I found in the first 4 centuries of the Catholic Church. That and Yaroslav Pelikan, who converted to Orthodoxy, his history of the Christian tradition. Volume 1 on the Catholic tradition is another really good volume on early Christian theology. At
the beginning there, I was looking at something on the chat screen here. Did you mention the Crocker book?
There's The Triumph by Crocker.
Yeah,
who's not a professional historian, if I'm not mistaken, but it's an interpretive history that is written from that point of view, to be sure. So in Thomas Wood's book, How the Catholic Church Built Western Civilization, is always a good read.
Very good. John, appreciate your call. That's some good resources for you there. Let's go now to Jim in West Virginia, listening on FM 89.7. Hey there, Jim. What's your question today?
Hey, I have an unusual question. I consider myself a Christian.
Okay.
And a lot of my friends in college were Catholics, and I respect the Catholic faith and all that. But I was just curious. There was a study years ago, and it was at the Chicago Diocese, and they interviewed the priest and asked them how many of them were gay, were homosexual, and I recall the number being about 45%. And one of the priests said that the other 55% were lying. And also, you see these cases in the news where these big lawsuits where Catholic priests are, the Catholic Church pays off these adult males that go back and say that they were abused by Catholic priests that were pedophiles, and the priests get reassigned to other churches instead of fired. What exactly is the church's stance on that? It seems like a place for gays and pedophiles.
Okay, I really appreciate the question. A couple things there. Pope Benedict issued a document during his pontificate indicating that even celibate and chaste homosexual men should not be admitted to Catholic seminaries, even if they were following the Church's moral teaching, because part of the job of a priest is to model authentic masculinity, and same-sex attraction is a deformation. It's of the natural sexual inclination, and so at least in that respect of their persons, they don't model authentic human sexuality or authentic masculinity. So it's not appropriate for a person with a deep-seated homosexual attraction to be admitted to the Catholic priesthood. Not that homosexual people are incapable of serving in a pastoral role. Of course they're capable, but they don't model that authentic masculinity. Of course, also in North America at this time, having deep same-sex attraction is often very much associated with a particular subculture that does not embrace the Church's moral teaching, and that's even more problematic, far more problematic, if you have someone that not only suffers from same-sex attraction, but also positively rejects the Church's moral teaching and embraces the so-called gay lifestyle or gay subculture. That's very, very problematic, and is associated with much higher rates of abuse and that sort of thing. So for these kinds of reasons, the Pope said, no, this is not an appropriate situation for somebody entering the Catholic priesthood. Now, in terms of, why then are there some practicing homosexuals within the Catholic priesthood? Well, to be sure, the willingness of a particular diocese to enforce the Church's rules on this varies from diocese to diocese. You have certain places where the culture in the seminary or the hierarchy is more or less supportive of that. And then you have people that are dishonest about their motives for entering the priesthood. It's true in schools and other institutions that some people hide aspects of their character because they're opportunities to act in ways that are contrary to the natural good of the human person. And as you put, they may actually use the priesthood or the school classroom or whatever else as an excuse to, or an opportunity to indulge that. Of course, that's very, very inappropriate, very wrong, very sinful. Church takes a very firm hand with that, very dim view of that. In terms of sexual abuse that's happened of minors in the past, since that has come to light, of course, in the last 20 years or so, the Church has taken a lot of steps to clean that up, to put barriers in place, to make that much harder to do, to hold not only priests but also bishops accountable, to moral teaching, not to reassign priests that have been abusers. And I also think it's helpful to put it in, if whatever the rates of sexual fidelity or infidelity are within the clergy, rates of childhood sexual abuse in the Catholic Church are not higher than they are in analogous institutions culture, whether they be schools or other denominations or other religions. The rates of abuse among Catholic clergy are not higher than they are of public school teachers, for instance. I know I quoted on the show yesterday a study by Hofstra University scholar Carol Shakeshaft, who argued that the rate of child sexual abuse in the California schools, for instance, was 100 times higher than that which is in the Catholic Church. But it doesn't get as much airplay, doesn't get as much coverage in the popular media because the California public school is not as much of a thing for public scrutiny as the Church is.
There you go. Jim, appreciate your call. Our phone number here, 1-800-585-9396. Do you have a question about the Catholic faith? Why does the Church teach such and such? Does the Church indeed teach such and such? You may think that the Church is teaching this, that, or the other, when in fact the Church has nothing to do with any of that, rather than, confusion or something that somebody said to you 30 years ago, which may or may not be the case. Give us a call, 1-800-585-9396, 1-800-585-9396. Let's go to Megan in Tallahassee, Florida, listening on the EWTN app. Hey there, Megan. What's your question today?
Hi, I'm new to the Catholic faith. I just was confirmed in March, and so I still have a lot of questions. And my mother is actually considering converting to Catholicism as well.
Okay.
And I grew up Protestant, and she recently decided to start teaching. And she went on this month-long retreat and did learned all of their practices and philosophies and all this stuff. But she says she still wants to be Catholic. So I haven't really said much about it because I think she really understands that as Catholics you don't really necessarily believe in that type of philosophy. And so I just don't know exactly how to explain it to her or where I can direct her.
Okay, sure. Thank you. I really appreciate that. There's some good resources on this topic at the website CatholicSpiritualDirection.com, which is run by Dan Burke of the National Catholic Register, and you'll find a number of articles on there about yoga and the modern practice of yoga and the difficulties that may for somebody who's deeply enmeshed in the philosophy of yoga who wants to understand and practice the Catholic faith. To be sure, yoga, as you find it in North America today, is a varied affair. And some people, go to yoga classes at their local YMCA, and they may just be bending and stretching.
Yeah.
Somebody else gets involved in yoga and really begins to, read deeply in Hindu philosophy and theology, going back to the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali in medieval India. In which case, then you begin to really incorporate some ideas that are very much not compatible with Catholic faith and Catholic philosophy. But to tease that out, I would direct you again to Dan Burke's website, CatholicSpiritualDirection.com, and his articles on yoga and the Catholic faith.
Megan, thank you so much for your call. Our phone number, 1-800-585-9396. 9396. Without further ado, Ian in Providence, Rhode Island, listening on the Station of the Cross, AM 1060. Hey there, Ian. What's your question today?
You just mentioned, it was 2 questions ago, where you talked about how the Catholic priest is supposed to model masculinity. And my question was, how can he do that when he's forbidden from being a husband and a father?
Oh, that's a great question. I really appreciate that, Ian. Ian, are you a Christian of some description?
I am.
Okay.
I am.
Do you think that Jesus Christ modeled authentic masculinity?
Well, I do.
Okay.
But, I mean, you have to remember, though, that when in Isaiah it quotes Jesus as being, when he's incarnate as the Father, right? Remember it called Jesus the Father, talking about God as the Father of all nations? So, of course, the Father of all nations. He created all of us, so absolutely, we're all his children.
Right, but Jesus the man, Jesus the Son of God, the man incarnate in flesh, who lived in a time and place in historical earth, and grew up in Nazareth and died on the cross and so forth. Christ was a celibate. Christ didn't have a human wife, and yet we have no trouble recognizing that Christ modeled authentic masculinity and authentic human sexuality even though he was celibate. He was perfectly chaste and he didn't have a wife. And in the same way, a Catholic priest can model authentic masculinity. Masculinity means a lot more than sexual activity within marriage. Of course, it's a kind of strength and leadership and guidance and protection that we give to women and to children and to society. That's an outflow of our masculinity, whether or not we're married, whether or not we're sexually active. I know the priests in my life that helped me so much in my marriage, the celibate, unmarried Catholic priests who are of masculinity in their strength, their courage, their self-sacrifice. Personally, I find in my own life that I get a much better example of authentic masculinity from someone that is able to say the sexual urge, who has tamed his sexuality and lived a completely chaste life, because of course Catholic men who are married are also called to a form of chastity, to marital chastity, which requires an awful lot of self-sacrifice and putting my sexuality at the service of my wife, at the service of my family, at the service of the church and society. It's not something that I take up for my own pleasure or self-indulgence. And that laying down of my sexuality and that chastity within marriage is a difficult and arduous thing. And for me, as a Catholic man, the example of the celibate Catholic priest is of tremendous value in helping me live out that vocation to marital chastity.
Ian, thank you for your call. I'm thinking of our priest friend up in Minnesota who was very instrumental in my conversion and in Adrienne's conversion. I can't think of a more manly man. And he walked the walk every day. Very masculine guy.
I was thinking about St. Louis de Montfort, who, as I recall, was kind of a big, burly sort of fellow. And I remember once he was preaching a retreat next door to a saloon, and he got kind of frustrated because of all the hooligans in the saloon carrying on. So he left the church, walked next door to the saloon, busted a couple of heads, dragged these guys in by the scruff of their necks, threw them down in the pews, and said, "Listen," and they got converted.
Wow, that's a good one. That's a good one.
Can't do that anymore.
Probably
it was
not.
a different time and a different place.
I think it is. Appreciate your call, though, Ian. Let's don't be a stranger. Call us again. Here's our phone: 1-800-585-9396. 1-800-585-9396. Is there something about the Catholic faith that maybe rubs you the wrong way? Is there something that you're confused about, or even angry about, or just concerned? Love to answer those questions for you at 1-800-585-9396. Great shows coming up on the TV side tonight. Mother Angelica Live Classics, and this is going to be a good one. The Parable of the Wedding Feast. This is a wonderful program. Do check it out. 8 p.m. Eastern tonight on EWTN television. Tomorrow night on EWTN Live, our friend Father Mitch Pacwa welcomes Professor Steve Weidenkopf to discuss the Crusades. And, we could get into the Crusades, and we've done that a number of times on Call to Communion. It is very misunderstood about what the Crusades actually did and what they did not do. So do check that out if you have any questions about the Crusades. Tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Eastern on EWTN television. When we come back from our quick break, it'll be Stella in Terre Haute, Indiana. Also Rosa in Texas. We've got one line open at 1-800-585-9396 here on Call to Communion. Stay with us.
Hi,
Hi, I'm Kathy Sinnott, and I'm host of EWTN's Celtic Connections. From our studios in Ireland, we have the big stories breaking in Great Britain, in Ireland, and across Europe. Celtic Connections is the only Catholic news show made in the UK or Ireland. So join me every Saturday and Sunday on Celtic Connections.
For dates and times in your area, log on to EWTN.com.
Next time on Mother Angelica Live Classics. Mother meditates on the Mass and how it relates to the kingdom of heaven as Christ explained it through the parable of the wedding feast. Next time on EWTN's Mother Angelica Live Classics.
This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. 1-800-585-9396.
I don't have money to travel, but I can travel the world on EWTN, and I do. God bless each of you. I love traveling the world on EWTN.
Have a comment about our programming, we'd love to hear from you too. Call 205-795-5773 or send us an email to radio@EWTN.com. Thank you very much for listening. God bless you.
Hi, this is Jerry Usher reminding you to listen to Vocation Boom Radio, Saturday at 5 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. Each week, I bring you dynamic interviews with bishops, priests, vocation directors, even seminarians and those who support them, all in an effort to assist the Holy Spirit in what is truly a vocation boom around the world. That's Vocation Boom Radio, Saturdays at 5 p.m. Eastern, only on EWTN Radio.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders. 1-800-585-9396.
29 after the hour, here's another phone number to write down, stick it next to your phone, and that would be EWTN Radio's listener comment line. It is open 24/7. If you've got any feedback about EWTN programming of any sort, or you're looking for some information there about EWTN Radio, whether it's pro or con, we take all criticism very seriously here at EWTN. This is God's network. This is not ours. So if you've got a comment of any kind about EWTN Radio, do give us a call at 205-795-5773, 205-795-5773, always looking for your feedback. Unless you're wearing headphones, and then you need to turn your volume down. Anyway, here's Stella in Terre Haute, Indiana. David just gave me a look like, what are you talking about? Feedback, well, come on, David, work with me here.
I was actually thinking about something else.
Well, okay, we'll leave it at that. Stella in Terre Haute. Hey there, Stella, how are you today?
Good.
Very good. What's your question today?
Okay, my question was a sister who was trying to get back on pre-3 to church. She has been going to church, but she has never gone for confession, I think, for the last 5 years. So she went to the confession and went and started just the way it starts. Uh-huh. And when she said it has been 5 years since her last confession, now the priest interrupted her and asked her, what did you repeat it again? And the priest told her to go where she belongs. And she asked the priest, what did you say? And the priest said, I mean, the only thing I can do to you is just to bless you. So she waited for the blessings. She came out, but when she called me, she wrote me a message. She sounded so disappointed. So I tried to ask her maybe to try and forgive the priest and calm down and maybe try to go to another place. So I wanted to know whether there is anything maybe I can try to tell her and help her more, maybe to be firm and know that maybe the priest is also a human being and maybe anything could have happened out of not intending to.
Well, this is very, very strange.
Yeah.
And the priest, if based on what you've told me, there may be more that I don't know about, but based on what you've told me, I would have to conclude that the priest was very much out of line, very much out of order, because, I mean, priests hear people who've come to confession that haven't been in 30 or longer. Yeah. And it's, there's absolutely no barrier to receiving absolution. You present yourself for a confession, desire to be reconciled to the church, that's why the priest is there. That's what he's there for, is to administer the sacraments. A priest that would refuse to grant absolution because it had been too long, that doesn't make any sense at all to me. No
that's
sense
just
at all.
wrong.
So she needs to go to another priest, pronto.
Right.
And obviously the priest is not, he is bound not to be able to discuss this with anybody. But, it wouldn't even be inappropriate to mention to the bishop, there's a priest that refused to give absolution because somebody said it had been too long. Because I don't know where the priest is from. I don't know what his education was.
Well, not just grant absolution, but to even hear the confession.
To even hear it, right,
Come
exactly.
on.
And, I hate to say it, but there may be himself is suffering from ignorance of Catholic faith on this issue, and someone needs to enlighten him. Because that should not have happened.
Yeah. Sorry, very sorry for that, about Stella. We're sorry for you. We're sorry for your sister. So hopefully she can seek another priest to hear her confession. Thank you for your call. 33 after the hour. This is Called to Communion here on EWTN. 2 lines open at 1-800-585-9396. Let's go to Thad in North Carolina. Hey there, Thad. What is your question today? Thad in North Carolina?
This is he. Hi.
Go right ahead.
Basically, my issue is sometimes it feels that there seems to be a double standard within the Catholic Church, and I'm not doing this as a criticism as much as a confusion. I don't understand how there are indeed priests who are gay, and they are practicing, and they hold high positions in the church. And then coming out with what you said earlier about Benedict, who I will acknowledge was a pope, but he did renounce his the pontificate, and had issues in the past. He, as Ratzinger, he made some statements about gay lifestyles. The reason this is so confusing to me is where does a gay man in a Catholic Church fit?
Right. Okay. I really appreciate that so much. So, a gay man fits in the Catholic Church the same place we all fit in the Catholic Church. He comes to the church because he desires to be in a relationship with God in faith and repentance, to receive grace in the sacraments in order to confront the arduous difficulties of living a holy life. And it's something that we all struggle with in one way or another. Yep. You have different issues. The church recognizes typically 4 different wounds of original sin, and seven capital vices and so forth. And some people have a predominant fault that lies in one direction. Some people have a predominant fault that lies in another. Some of us may have historical or even biological circumstances that make it particularly difficult for us to do right in one way or area or another. The church is there to embrace, to give us the sacraments, administer them, and help us in our journey. And of course, we all stumble and fall in many ways, and we repair to the sacraments, and we get up and we try again. I have homosexual friends who are Catholic, who are following the church's teaching. Of course, it's an arduous path. It's a difficult path, but they see in that the way of true human dignity. And for some of them, it means a life of complete continence, complete chastity. And they're not going to marry. They're going to remain single, with all the challenges that poses. Yeah. This is the way of dignity, but given their particular circumstance. Never said it was easy, but it's dignified. Now, you raise the question of, aren't there people in the church who live in flat contradiction to the teaching of the church? Well, of course that's true. And Christ told us that this was going to happen. Mm-hmm. And all we can say when people are not embracing the teaching of the church and living it generously is, I'm so sorry, because they're not going to bring themselves happiness, and they're certainly not going to bring other people to happiness.
There you go. Thad, thank you so much for your call. 36 after the hour. Here's a quick one from Jason checking us out today on YouTube. Jason says, where does the church get the concept of indulgences? I know that we touched on indulgences, I think, a couple of days ago. But where does the church get the concept of indulgences, and how do they work?
Sure. Well, an indulgence is related to the concept of penance. Penance is simply the reparation that we attempt to make for the disorder, the injustice that we brought into the world through our sin, or into relationships through our sin. The church imposes specific penances for sin. After it grants absolution, the church will impose a penance. You go to confession and you hear somebody say, well, your priest says, well, pray 5 Our Fathers or 5 Hail
Mhm.
Marys. That's a penance, okay?
Mhm.
Well, in antiquity, it was not uncommon for penances imposed by the church to be very, very, very difficult, very long and arduous. Sometimes for particularly egregious public sins like apostasy or murder or adultery, somebody might actually have to do penance for years, be excluded from the sacraments for years, and fast and wear sackcloth and this
Yeah.
kind of thing. And in that context, back in about the 250s in North Africa, in Carthage, in fact, there who were in that situation, and they were appealing to the church, hey, could you penances? And by the way, this guy over here who's getting ready to get his head chopped off by the Roman governor, he did not cringe under torture or whatever, and he's going to be executed. He says, won't you let some of my obedience count over here for this guy who's doing penance? And is there any validity to that idea? And the bishop said, yeah, there actually is. Appealing to the merits of the martyrs and the confessors to be applied to your penance, there does make some sense in that, because, we learn, St. Paul tells us that all of the members of the body of Christ share the spiritual goods that we have together. That's what the communion of saints means. So it does seem to be sensible to appeal to the merits of the martyrs and the saints and the confessors on your behalf to lessen that temporal penance. And realizing that, they saw, well, if we can apply that to penances imposed by the church in this life, couldn't we also apply that to the penances that people pay in purgatory? And of course, that's a rational inference. And so the church began saying, yeah, here, do this spiritual work, offer these prayers, do this corporal work of mercy, and the church will apply the merits of the saints, the merits of the martyrs on your behalf to lessen the temporal punishment, even of those in purgatory. Can be applied for your own sake or for others. And so that's the rational foundation of the practice of indulgences.
Jason, thank you so much. Thanks to everybody checking us out today on YouTube. We are glad to be on YouTube each and every day, Monday through Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Coming up on 39 minutes after the hour, when we come back, we'll talk with Patrick in Massachusetts, and we've got a line open for you at 1-800-585-9396. What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic yourself? Or is there something that is confusing to you about the Catholic faith? Or is there just something that makes you go, huh? Catholics do what? That may not be true. Give us a call. We'll clear it up for you. 1-800-585-9396. This is Called to Communion. EWTN.
Sharing the fullness of the Catholic faith. 1-800-585-9396. This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
This is Oblate Father Andrew Small, National Director of the Pontifical Mission Societies in the United States. She walked and walked and walked. 2,800 miles, in fact. Uwe was it. She and her family walked those long miles to freedom 20 years ago, as genocide ravaged her country and killed 800,000 of her fellow Rwandans. She's now Sister Uwe, and she told me, "We still need healing, Father." She is still walking towards freedom. It's a journey of hope and a lesson from the missions.
Brought to you by the Pontifical Mission Societies. To learn more about becoming a missionary right where you are, visit our website mission.org. Remember, if you're baptized, you're a missionary. Through prayer and sacrifice, in word and witness, we're all part of this one family in mission.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders. 1-800-585-9396.
Welcome back. 41 after the hour. This is Called to Communion on EWTN. We are glad that you're with us today. Let's go now to Kenny in North Dakota, listening on FM 104.1, one of the Real Presence radio stations. Hey there, Kenny. What's your question today?
My question today is, what is the difference between a Catholic church versus a non-denominational or just a regular Christian church? They read the same Bible. I mean, you would think they have the same focus in mind. What makes the Catholic Church not maybe better, but maybe more right?
Okay, sure. Thank you so much, Kenny. I really appreciate that. Well, there are a number of things we could say. When you look into sacred scripture, say, for instance, the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 28, when Christ handed the faith on to the apostles, to the 11, he gave them not a book, them a body of oral tradition, his oral teaching, none of which he had committed to writing. He also gave them practices, rituals like the Mass. Do this in memory of me, he said, the elements of the Lord's Supper, or the command that they should absolve, forgive sins. Whoever sins you forgive are forgiven. Whoever sins you retain are retained. That's what he said in John chapter 20. So he handed this deposit of faith and worship over to the apostles and gave them a command that they should make disciples of all nations and teach them everything that Christ had commanded them, and that he would be with them to the end of the age. So in other words, he gave the faith over to people, to individuals, with the promise of divine assistance and a command that they perpetuate that down through the centuries. Now, when controversy entered the Christian faith early on, we read about it in the book of Acts, like, say, Acts chapter 15, for instance. The apostles did not appeal to the Bible. Bible hadn't been written yet. Rather, they took counsel together, and with the authority given to them by Christ, they issued binding declarations. You can read about this in Acts chapter 15. They said, "It seems good to the Holy Spirit and to us to lay upon you the following commands." Then in Acts chapter 16, we learn that the apostles went forth from Jerusalem and communicated these uniform and dogmatic teaching to the church throughout the world, so that there was one faith that was held, not one faith in one church and another faith in another church, but one faith and one practice, one form of worship that was held universally throughout the world. All right, you read about that in Acts chapter 16. St. Paul talks about it as well in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, when he says, if someone wants to have a different practice, know that we have no other practice, nor do the churches of God. You read about that in 1 Corinthians 11. So in other words, one faith, even one form of worship that had to, throughout the Christian world, whether you were in Corinth or Rome or Athens or Jerusalem, wherever you were, one Christian faith all throughout the world under the leadership of the apostles. Now that universal practice of the faith, for universal, is just Catholicos, or Catholic. That's where we get the word Catholic from. The Catholic Church is that one church founded by Christ that's the same everywhere throughout the world, that holds to one faith. Now, how do you keep a group of people together on the same page? How do you make sure that everybody holds to one faith, practices one discipline and one form of worship? The only way you can hold a group of people together like that is through the principle of authority. There has to be a single authority that has the ability to enforce that one faith and that one discipline throughout. Well, Christ set the church up to have just such an authority. Matthew chapter 16, verse 18, we read that Christ gave that authority to St. Peter. He said to Peter, Peter of course means rock, Peter, you are the rock. I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. I give to you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. In John chapter 21, he said to Peter, Peter, you are to feed my sheep. You are to feed my lambs. You are to feed my lambs. So that one organization, that one society founded by Christ with one faith everywhere throughout the world under the leadership of St. Peter and his successors, that has the authority to keep the faith, to protect the church, to keep it on one piece of solid ground. That's the defining characteristic of the Catholic faith. Through and look how historically those that have deflected from the Catholic Church, that have gone off and formed their own religions, have lost very important elements. Christian faith and Christian theology. We could go through each of these denominations that you mentioned. We could go by church and show how they've lost the true doctrine of salvation, or the right proper understanding of the nature of the Trinity, or the nature of the afterlife. And we could give a number of individual analyses. But the basic principle is one of a city founded by Jesus to make sure that everybody has one faith and one practice throughout the world down through history.
Yeah. Kenny, thank you so much for your call. Let's go to Jeannie in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, listening on FM 97.3. Hey there, Jeannie. What do you say? Jeannie in Oklahoma City, are you there? Uh-oh. Jeannie in Oklahoma City. One more time. Okay, let's put her on hold. And if you could, Rich, let's go to Patrick in Massachusetts, listening on the Station of the Cross, AM 1060. Hey, Patrick, what's your question today?
Hey, how are you guys? God bless you and keep you. Thank you so much for the work you guys do. I listen to you every day on my way to work.
Oh, thanks, Patrick.
I have a somewhat of a slow ball question in my mind. I mean, you guys field so many great questions. This one's pretty easy. Just wondering the criteria nowadays for fasting. Today's reading, you'll forgive me, I can't quote the verse, but Moses had fasted for 40 days and 40 nights and had a great communion with the Lord, and a column of smoke that fell in front of his tent. And, wondering, I fast avidly. My father and I practice fasting quite a bit. And we're just wondering if we're doing it the right way, or if there's something more that we're doing, or if maybe we're doing it too much. Certainly I believe that water is permitted when we fast, and I've heard that maybe fasting isn't always about something else. So I was just wondering if you could clear it up for me.
Sure.
Wow, what a great question.
It is.
Well, of course, in terms of what the church requires of us, it asks very little in terms of fasting. Only 2 days where Catholics are absolutely obligated to fast in the Catholic calendar. Of course, Ash Wednesday and Good Friday are days of fast, and those fasts are not very arduous. They're pretty low, low bar in terms of what you have to do. And you do have to fast, of course, an hour before receiving Holy Communion. And so in terms of the sort of bare minimum requirement, it's not very arduous. But nobody said you had to stick to the bare minimum. Of course, it's perfectly appropriate to fast more as you derive spiritual benefit. And this is one of the classic spiritual disciplines. It can be done both to tame the flesh as well as an act of penance and reparation for sin. There are a number of different fasts that we find in sacred scripture. There are, on a very few occasions, extreme fasts where people fast from food and water and sexual activity and basically deny themselves any kind of or corporeal indulgence at all. Those are very extreme and they're very rare. But of course you can tailor that according to your own needs under spiritual direction. I would advise, because it's possible to injure your health, and you don't want to go so far yourself ineffective in service to the kingdom of God. It's useful to undertake a very arduous fast of a qualified spiritual director.
Keeping all that in mind, then Patrick could pretty much write his own ticket.
He can write his own ticket, but the church does encourage us. We're not really supposed to write our own tickets in terms of calling all the shots. We are supposed to defer to the judgment of those who are wiser, more prudent, more informed than we are.
Sure.
So it's very useful to cultivate a relationship of direction with a wise and learned priest, or even a layperson who's more experienced in the faith, who can make sure that we're not running off the rails and becoming, doing any damage or harm to ourselves.
Or anything.
So, two great books on spiritual direction. Again, we mentioned Dan Burke's website earlier in the show. He has a great book on Catholic spiritual direction, as well as Father Thomas Dubé. I know because I just bought a copy of his book on spiritual direction yesterday at the EWTN bookstore. So I know the catalog carries it.
Appreciate your call there, Patrick. One thing I was going to ask you, beyond what is that fasting on Ash Wednesday and again on Good Friday, do you sometimes fast yourself?
Not as much as I need to.
Oh, okay. It's a good thing. It's a good practice. I certainly applaud those who can do that. Let's go now to Rosa in Texas. Hey there, Rosa. What's your question today? Rosa in Texas?
Yes.
Hi, go right ahead.
Well, my question is, like I was saying, I'm a Catholic, and we were raised as Catholics, but they don't. The Catholic doesn't. They don't show us how to understand. They don't talk clearly. They don't show us how to treat people. They don't show how to be good persons, and that's why we changed to the Christian family here in Texas, because I wanted the kids to understand what they were saying, and we never understand what they were saying.
I'm so sorry to hear that, Rosa. I'm very, very sorry to hear that you had difficulty understanding the church in your community. When you talk about Catholics showing how to treat people, I wonder, are you familiar with the life or the story of Mother Teresa, Mother Calcutta?
I've never heard.
You never heard of Mother Teresa? She
kind of, yeah.
Yeah. Mother Teresa was an Albanian nun, and she went to India and actually I think was teaching school there for a while, and then she got a special vocation to serve the poorest of the poor in India, and she really made a name for herself worldwide in terms of going after those people that nobody else in the world would help, particularly those who are at the verge of death, pulling them off the streets and so forth, carrying them into her homes and caring for them and treating them with dignity and respect all the way up to the very last moments. And I mention her just because her story is generally pretty well known, and I think even if you don't understand the language that's being used, You can always look to the lives of the saints, and if you're not familiar with Mother Teresa, you can look at many of the others throughout history that have done so much to give of themselves for care of others, even to a heroic degree. And this, of course, is why the Church holds up for us the examples of the saints, because the saints are the ones that have lived the faith so generously. But again, I'm sorry for your experience. I would encourage you to come back and give it another try. If the parish where you were attending is one where you to follow the priest, there's nothing stopping you from seeking out a priest that you can understand better.
Sure.
And I would encourage you to do that, because when it comes to knowing how to treat people, the Catholic Church, of course, is the only religion in the world that really teaches the dignity of the human person from conception all the way to natural death, and demands that we treat people as created in the image of God, worthy of love and dignity and respect their whole life long.
Rosa, thank you so much for your call. Let's go to Chris in Idaho. Hey there, Chris. What's your question today?
Hello?
Hey, Chris. Hi.
Hi. I was just wondering, can a Protestant go to confession and receive absolution? Because I'm Catholic and my mom likes to go to Mass with me, and I've just been explaining the sacraments to her, and like she's seriously in the church, and I'm just wondering, if they go to confession, can they receive the absolution?
A Protestant can receive absolution from a Catholic priest if they're in danger of death, are not able to contact a member of their own denomination, ask for the sacraments willingly and freely, and manifest a Catholic faith in the sacraments. So that's a pretty high bar. All right. Under most circumstances, a Protestant cannot receive absolution from a Catholic priest. Those are the circumstances under which they could. Now, most of the time, if a Protestant manifests a Catholic faith in the sacraments and wants to receive them, probably means they believe in the Catholic Church and
Sure.
they're on their way in, all right? And so in this particular instance, if your mother is coming with you to Mass and she really wants to receive the sacraments, we can make that happen.
Yeah,
we can make that happen. The easiest way to do it is to become Catholic. And if she does have that Catholic faith in the sacraments, then I don't know why you would want to hold back.
Yeah, if your Catholic church, Chris, or one near you has an RCIA program, those generally start in the fall, although there are exceptions, and it's about a 9-month process. I'm going to be helping out our RCI team at our church this year.
Fantastic.
Looking forward to that. Did that back when we lived in California. Looking forward to it again this year. But anyway, Chris, as your mother progresses on the way, I believe there is a point just before becoming a Catholic where she could go to.
Yes, usually you do receive reconciliation before you've received the Eucharist or confirmation.
Exactly. So do look into that, Chris, if that resonates with you. I want to thank all the folks who called in today, all those that we couldn't get on. Maybe you can get on tomorrow. For everybody checking us out on the radio and on YouTube, thank you so much. We will see you again at this same time tomorrow on Call to Communion. God bless.